So with Apple diving headfirst into the price bracket that we normally associate with affordability, just what does the iPhone SE offer that we haven't already seen on Android? This of course is our review of the iPhone SE. Thanks for watching 9to5 Google on YouTube. Remember to thumbs up, hit subscribe and enable notifications with the bell icon to be among the first to watch our upcoming videos. So straight away, this is literally the iPhone 8 from the outside, iPhone 11 Lite if you will, from the inside. It's a dinky little phone that sometimes feels like a toy, but this is still a smartphone made of what you would likely consider premium materials. Of course I have fairly large hands, so it definitely feels small compared to the multitude of 6 and 7 inch devices that we suddenly become accustomed to over here on the Android side of the fence. Let's put that price tag into perspective though for a second. $400 will net you the Pixel 3a and the SE's likely rival in 2020, the Pixel 4a. The only premium materials to be found on those devices, or to be found on those upcoming devices, will likely be the displays, which might not even have the same colour accuracy of the iPhone SE's LCD display. Add in the True Tone colour matching feature, and even though it is just a tiny bit over 720p, the SE's IPS LCD display really is reasonably impressive given the price point here. Outdoor brightness might be an issue with a 600 nit peak brightness. Is it okay for outdoor usage though? Sure, but it could be a little better, truth be told. The question you probably need to ask yourself is though, do you need glass and metal on a cheap smartphone? Maybe. I personally do prefer the Pixel 3a's look over that of the SE, but I'm sure the general public might actually disagree. Plastic and polycarbonate though are far more durable, especially if you plan on using a smartphone for an extended period of time. The fact that you also get an IP67 water and dust resistance rating at all is another impressive aspect of this particularly small package. That said, it is harder to forgive those bezels, and they really do feel like a throwback or relic of the recycled design. Plus, losing out on screen real estate in favour of a fingerprint scanner feels like another oversight in 2020. Sure, Touch ID is fast and the little haptic feedback is great when you activate it, but I think most of us have moved past 16:9 for larger displays that don't sacrifice the immersion day to day. Hey, if you're content with a 2015 design that has been updated for 2017 and now has been repushed out in 2020, then fair enough. Personally, it's not something I could put up with for a few years into the future. While I'd say that I'm pretty platform agnostic, iOS often feels like it doesn't scratch my itch for something a bit more flavoursome. That's not to say it isn't great for most people. The consistency is most definitely one of the mobile operating system's biggest strengths. Because of that, I do simultaneously love and hate that all apps feel uniform. It's superb for menu consistency, but when every app is built to feel, special, none of them end up feeling that way in my opinion. That's just my 2 cents, but it might explain why I struggle to stick with an iPhone for more than a few weeks. That said, you do get the latest and greatest iOS 13 build on the iPhone SE, which will duly be updated for quite yet some time to come. Let's hope that the advent of Google's own chipset will result in an update record like the iPhone. Although that said, I'm not entirely sure that smartphones are sold to the general public based upon software updates alone. Of course, we know that the A13 Bionic chipset is an absolute monster, but while the iPhone SE has a more powerful chipset than just about every single flagship Android phone, it's still kind of like having the fastest car on a drag strip. Sure, there is plenty of overhead for power-intensive tasks, but you probably never even get to 20% all the way of utilising that under-the-hood grunt, especially when you're running in a straight line. Then again, I'm not entirely sure how iOS could be altered to let you take advantage of the A13. iOS is very restrictive by nature, and that's why in many ways it's the perfect alternative to Android. While I have some gripes with iOS itself, the experience is typically slick, even despite the fact that iOS 13 does feel a little shoehorned into this form factor. It is clearly designed for a gesture interface in most regards too. At times this is clearly evident, and things can get a little cramped on such a small display, the on-screen keyboard being a prime example. Although even with just 3GB of RAM, the iPhone SE is snappy, smooth and more importantly reliable. I haven't had any of the RAM purging issues that some have reported. Everything runs just about as well as it does on the current iPhone 11 series. But I have to say that the way iOS handles notifications is nothing short of painful. I tend to just swipe them away from my lock screen, but the home screen dots are pretty reasonable enough. Overall, if you are comfortable with a small 16:9 display and the inherent limitations of iOS, then the iPhone SE will no doubt be a joy to use. For everyone else out there, it probably would be one to avoid. The camera on the iPhone SE is okay. Of course, the iPhone 8 might have been one of the best smartphone cameras around back in 2017 when it released. It definitely isn't now though. At 12 megapixels, the sensor stacks up quite well on paper with the recent Pixel series. Unlike the Pixel 3a though, stills don't wow in quite the same way. That said, it is still a pretty solid camera that goes toe to toe with most Android phones in and around the same price bracket. It's pretty surprising just how nice the images are, but you don't get a ton of flexibility. Thanks to the inclusion of the A13 Bionic chipset, portrait mode is also available on that single camera setup too, but that was also present on the iPhone XR. You can only use this on pets and people though, which means that without using a third-party application, you can't actually add the fake bokeh effects to inanimate objects. The lack of a night mode is also disappointing too, especially when you will most definitely end up taking photos when it gets dark, as you would with just about any other phone. Results are passable at the very best, terrible in most cases though. That said, there are very few smartphones at this price point that include capable low light shooting modes, save the Pixel 3a. I think knowing the limitations and its strong points, like for instance shooting outdoors only, the iPhone SE will probably be more than enough for most people out there. Quick snaps on vacation or just day to day are absolutely fine, nothing more, nothing less. As for video, 4K 60 FPS is superb on the rear facing camera thanks to the OIS and EIS included. Images have great clarity, dynamic range and look really good. Video is arguably the strongest portion of imaging on iPhones and the SE is no different. 60 FPS video at 1080p and UHD 4K is silky smooth with no recording limits too, something that is not always the case with affordable Android smartphones out there. As for the battery, the 1821mAh cell found in the iPhone SE feels especially small in 2020. That said, it probably will last you all day doing basic tasks thanks to the efficiency of the A13 Bionic chip. Don't stray too far from the basics though, as running high-end games and 3D titles especially will really started to eat into that paltry battery. Because of this, I'm not entirely sure how it will hold up over time, but the idle battery is still one of the areas that past iPhones have impressed me the most, and the SE is no different. So the crux of the argument is that this is a good phone that when priced at $400, in many ways really is too hard to ignore. Yes, it isn't likely to be the iPhone to make the most ardent Android fans switch, instead it's a solid compromise for someone that might be unsure of their budget or not confident to sift through the mid-range Android space to find a smartphone that hits all of their requirements. Let's put it this way, I wouldn't recommend the iPhone SE to most of my friends or most of you watching. Instead, I would wholeheartedly recommend it to family members that maybe haven't upgraded their smartphone in a long time and have a low budget. The fact that you also get software updates for 5 years is the icing on a pretty enticing cake. Somewhat problematically for Android though, the SE is highly likely to compete for mindshare far better than the upcoming Google Pixel 4a. So as Android fans, that is somewhat concerning. That's even if objectively the 4a ends up being a far better smartphone in almost every regard. So with battery and display resolution issues aside, the iPhone SE on paper at least will still run rings around our perceived Android mid-range. Plus, Apple can still boast about having the most powerful smartphone under $500, even if they have nothing to actually utilise all of that internal grunt. But let's look at this from the Android perspective. This device blows a hole in our perceived Android mid-range, which is a good thing as it will hopefully push Android OEMs to really assess what they bring to the table in future. And that only benefits everyone long term. So with all of that said, let us know how you feel about the iPhone SE down in the comment section below. Keep it civil though if you can, but until next time, this is Damien with 9to5 Google saying thanks for watching and I will speak to you later.